you have the time to listen to me grind? Take down the film watchers and nerds all at once.
Hey, what should I explain first? The hat or the fact the sound is working? I literally tested this out 4 separate times, and I'm not joking. Like, push record, run through the tabs, go back, watch it again, just to check that 1, my mic is on. 2, the background music is 1, not so overly loud that you can't hear me, and 2, isn't playing at 150 times speed, so that it doesn't sound like Zach Reed is, and also Gabe Gearing isn't singing along with the Chipmunks. So hopefully you can hear me, and the background noise is both subtle and not some sort of extra comic relief. I am more than enough comic relief. Okay, so the next thing I guess I should explain is what we're doing here today. And we're talking about Jaret Patterson. Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about running back. We're in wide receiver heavy. It's time to talk about running back. Zach Reed wanted me to talk about Jaret Patterson, and I had no opinion on Jaret Patterson when I actually met him. So I'm going to break down, at least in brief, because it's a running back, so who cares really, from Buffalo no less, what I see in Jaret Patterson's profile, how I like him, and how I have him ranked for the 2021 class entering the NFL, currently before the draft, without combine data and everything else. Also, I'm wearing a hat. That's not because I like hats. I am aware I look stupid in all hats. And believe me, just in case life had changed the shape of my head, because, you know, I've been hit a lot. You can probably tell. So, you know, it might change the shape of my head. I don't know. I went and got like 7 different hats because my kids and my wife look great in hats. I know that's a weird flex, but my wife looks fantastic in hats. Like, she looks good anyway, but any hat she puts on, she looks instantly better. And I'm not jealous. You're jealous. You're jealous of my wife's ability to wear hats. That's something you've got to live with, not me. And my kids have inherited this. No matter what hat they put on their head, it looks like it was designed for their head. It looks like, you know, that's what a hat is meant to do for you, as well as keep your head warm and keeping that 80% of body heat that you lose out there. Also, it's meant to be, you know, somewhat decorative. I'm aware that does not happen with me. I don't know why. I haven't put a lot of science into it. I haven't measured it or nothing. I'm just aware that every hat I've ever put on my head makes me look even more ridiculous. But, hang on, I'll prove it. Here's a selection of hats I got. This is a very dapper hat, okay? This is a fantastic old world, neat little hat. And, you know, it's a nice hat. Then I put it on my head. Now it's suddenly not. Yeah, you get it. You don't need me to explain how ridiculous that looks. Here's just a regular boggin. This is a expensive boggin. This actually, you know, costs money, and it's fluffy inside, and I look like this in it. Yeah. Want to go again? Okay, let's go extreme. I got this thick. The only hat that looks bearably okay on my head is the literal $3 beanie from the local dollar store. Those are the only ones that look marginally like my head was designed to wear hats. And that's what I'm wearing, okay? Why? Because as you, more than anyone else, is aware, I have gone past the fluffy Wolfman, that's cool, he lets it grow stage, and into that guy might be the next Unabomber stage. And so, the hat. Yeah. Okay. I apologize. I know I look ridiculous. You don't have to keep saying it. I get it. But it's that or Unabomber. And we don't need that around here. I tell you what. You want to help me out? You don't. Okay. You want to help yourself out? My wife's Twitter is at RPHWrites, because she's a writer and actually successful. One of us has got to be. If you could at her on Twitter and say, hey, could you give your husband a haircut? That'd be great. Because even she's noticed, like it's bad enough that my wife turned around the other day, looked at me, and said, hey, you need a haircut. That's right, my wife looked at me. And you gotta know, as a nerd that plays fantasy football, that is not a thing that happens very often. So it's that bad, but she's busy being successful and popular, and I refuse to go to a barber. So simple. So I need her to be reminded of that, and me looking like this, even that's not enough. So I guess if you hate the hat or the Unabomber look, like that would be helpful. That's either gonna have no effect, or it's gonna have my wife mad at me next time I talk to her. Interested to find out which. But anyway, no, that was way too much introduction. Let's break into Jaret Patterson's numbers. Here's what you need to know about Jaret Patterson. He is not a receiver. Nuh-uh. I was surprised because Zach Reed, who's very big on the running back, should have receiving upside. He's the one posting fairly regularly and also talking on podcasts about how Derrick Henry has had a top five historical rushing season in 2020 and finished 70 points below Alvin Kamara as wide receiver 3. Like, that rushing is not how we get upside in the NFL. Even if you're literally the 5th best rushing season ever, and you're still 70 points below wide receiver 3, closer to Chris Carson in PPR points per game than Alvin Kamara, who you're just below in overall PPR rank. That's all stuff Zach Reed figured out, not me. I'm not looking that hard at running backs, to be perfectly honest with you. I just know how much it hurts when they owe me. So yeah, typically we're looking for some sort of historical data that they are involved in the rushing game. This isn't because NFL level athletes can't figure out how to go, because, you know, even you and me, whoever you have, you might be in, obviously all the NFL athletes watch this, so you NFL athletes out there, you can catch balls, and you know you are physically superior to me and everyone else in every way, and the rest of us can catch balls. So I believe NFL running backs can do that whenever they want, frankly, but it kind of diminishes how difficult it is to play in the NFL to think it's that simple, right? You've got to learn a lot of stuff, from route concepts to getting open to being worried that you're just going to get slaughtered while you stand there hoping the ball comes your way. It actually requires some skill to catch the ball in the NFL compared to your yard, right? So there's a lot that goes into it, and players who haven't demonstrated an ability to do that a lot before going to the NFL, one, have to pick up more practice, if nothing else, and two, it seems to be, and I agree with Zach Reed on this one, the NFL doesn't draft you to do things you haven't already demonstrated a propensity to do, which is a fancy way of saying if you don't do it in college, NFL teams aren't going to ask you to start doing it. They are not the most imaginative group of people. They're not like, ooh, there's a rusher, let's see if he can be a receiver. No, if they draft you and you've been a rusher in college, they're probably going to use you as a rusher in the NFL. Now, the good news is Jaret Patterson slaps as a rusher, like really slaps, and there are some big rushers in this class. Like there are some significantly talented running backs in every class, but in this class there are pure rushers that really hit hard. In terms of numbers, I obviously never watch football, so I have no idea if they actually hit hard, but I imagine you must have to hit pretty hard in order to get good stats, so that's my assumption. I'm still immensely amused by the number of people who like legitimately think I don't watch football. Why would I do any of this if I didn't enjoy watching sport? But regardless, it's fun to be a nerd, so here we go. Or a hybrid nerd, or whatever the hell I am. Yeah, Jaret Patterson slaps as a rusher. Like, he is really impressive in terms of his production as a rusher. Now, he's playing in the MAC East, which basically never gets draft capital. The few times it has gotten draft capital, any kind of fantasy relevance, let's stick to that, over the last few years, it's been Brandon Oliver, who I insist was a lot better than his career panned out to be. We saw him be a top 12 running back at one point in the NFL, but draft capital teams have a bias towards it, and you're going to get faded even if you demonstrate an above average skill set at some point, unless you can force the issue so hard, typically only a wide receiver, that they have no choice. So James, as a tangent, the way that affects James Robinson next year is an open question. I do think he's a different kind of breed, and so he will still get at least one more year before the team finds an excuse to run out a worse first-round pick ahead of him. But I mean, it is a problem, and Brandon Oliver is just another reminder of that. You've also got James Starks, who played for the Green Bay Packers for a while, with Eddie Lacy playing 1B, really, to Eddie Lacy's 1A. He was much more of a receiver in college than either players, but Brandon Oliver was much more of a balanced, well-rounded skill set in college compared to either. So James Starks and Jaret Patterson, actually opposite, pose somewhat of a continuum between an extreme rusher and a very decent pass catcher. Like 70% of the yards that James Starks got in college came from the rushing game. The average for top 12 running backs, for example, is around 83%. 70%, you're talking about a Naheem Hines level profile, which is not what I remember from James Starks in the NFL. He was working as that pass catching back, but I mean, he was sizable, if a little skinnier than Eddie Lacy. And I can already hear you making the Eddie Lacy jokes. Don't. This is an Eddie Lacy friendly place, okay? I liked Eddie Lacy. I think he was very good, and you ought to stop it, okay? I hear you out there, fat shamers. He wasn't fat. He was big. Well, he got fat sometimes, but, you know, human beings can do that. They're allowed. I like Eddie Lacy. That's the end of the story. But James Starks did play more of a receiver in the NFL, but I never would have imagined that in his college profile, but it does actually bear out to be true. Now, interesting enough, both those running backs from this conference that have some sort of fantasy significance, James Starks was drafted, if memory serves, and the video shown a bit, in like the 4th round or so. Brandon Oliver was an undrafted free agent, and so obviously already owned my heart before we even started, because I love undrafted free agents. So Jaret Patterson's draft upside is limited if we didn't already see a marginal season, and I'll get to that when I talk about his actual production, in 2020 because of COVID. So that's the background of where he's coming from. The NFL has speculated there. We found good running backs from this conference. That's not overly a concern. It's really about opportunity and how much teams are going to invest and how much that says about the long career cycle. But Jaret Patterson is the biggest rusher, or got the majority of his production from the rushing game, more than top 12 running backs typically do, so a Derrick Henry kind of profile, more than those two running backs that come specifically from this conference, which both specifically come from this exact team in Buffalo, interestingly enough. From the whole MAC East, it's really Buffalo that the NFL will find fantasy relevant players in eventually, if you like team adjustments, which I still do not, but still. So, why do I say he's so impressive? Well, for one thing, if you're just primarily working the rushing game, it's actually relatively harder to show up in some significant stats. Now, a significant stat, which isn't predictive and I wouldn't advise being one of the main stats you look at, but I do like to glance at yards per touch for running backs, just because it gives you a basic idea of how impressive they're going to look on film and what the NFL is going to see. Now, James Patterson is actually pretty much the most productive based on yards per touch of any running back coming from this conference, and specifically of those three, I think he ranks second, below James Sparks, or below Brandon Oliver and James Sparks, but both had significantly high averages in yards per touch compared to the conference or the team level. Both dominated in their situation is essentially what I'm saying, even when you just look at yards per touch. Now, the reason that's significant is because if you're not getting receptions and receiving yards, which Jaret Patterson did throughout his career, and I should point out that the current database I've got out there pinned to my timeline and in the description down below for free. Just I don't even see if you click on it. I don't get to monitor even your clicks. It's just so we all get to play. Please follow the people in the source tab who make that possible, by the way. Anyway, getting back to it. If you're just in the rushing game and being significantly efficient on a per touch basis, that essentially means you have to be a more prolific rusher, because you don't have the added benefit, the added floor of production that being active in the receiving game actually gives you. Now, Jaret Patterson actually has about, memory serves, and again, it'll come up in the video in a second, about 93% of his yards are coming from the rushing game. That's significantly high compared to prospects that are successful in the NFL and this conference. And again, James Sparks had 70%, and Brandon Oliver had around about 82-83%, around about the average of successful players, to be fair. That's not a predictive number, it's just a descriptive number of what type of skill set they're displaying in the NFL, or I find it to be anyway. It's a synonym or an acronym or another way of looking at the Zach Reed rule, speaking of the Dynasty Dummies, of whether a player had 20 or more receptions in any one particular season. Jaret Patterson never had that, by the way. He does not pass the Zach Reed sniff test, which is interesting because Zach Reed likes him. He definitely brought him up on that live stream I did with him on Monday Grinding that was on a Tuesday a couple of weeks ago. And this yards per touch stat kind of speaks to why. He was so productive as a rusher that his per touch production actually compares to those with a very significant receiving floor, which helps boost up such those kinds of per attempt stats like yards per touch. So, as a simple way of explaining this, if you go, or if you were to, in the NFL, in the prospect database that I have, go to the by year tab, select specifically that conference, and go to the weighted yards per team attempt column, which is a stat specifically in there to look at running backs. It gives extra value to receiving stats, actually, which again James Patterson has relatively little of, and then sort best to worst, so highest yards per team attempt weighted to lowest in that conference. The top 5 seasons come from James Sparks, Brandon Oliver, and some guy called Keith Marshall, who actually played on the team in 2020 when Jaret Patterson's stats is actually missing, and that's something I have to fix in our database, and Jaret Patterson as a pure rusher. None of those other players in the top 5, and in fact his other season turns up in the top 8, have so little usage in the receiving game. And again, you have to be excessively productive in the rushing game to get close to a per touch efficiency to reflect players getting a decent role in the receiving game, just because you have an added way of adding yards. Receptions and or use in receiving game just boost your numbers a little bit. That's why they add such a decent floor, and why Alvin Kamara outproduced Derrick Henry despite putting up the 5th best rushing season to ever happen in the NFL. And again, that doesn't mean Derrick Henry isn't amazing and fantastic and wasn't last year. It's just a reflection of how much bump reception and use in the receiving game actually gives running backs, and on the college level that is true too. So, he has like 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons, and that includes 2020. Now, the other thing about Jaret Patterson is he stepped onto the team as a running back 1. Now, I've only recently started to look at breakout age in terms of running backs, but it does seem to have some significant value. There's some weirdness to it, unlike the wide receiver stat, where there seems to need to be a wider grouping to actually find signal. But it is better to be a larger part of the team earlier than later. Having said that, we do remember that running back's best season is what matters. It still doesn't matter if you don't do well early. There are a lot of things that can get in the way of running backs that have nothing innately to do about them, such as playing behind Saquon Barkley, aka Miles Sanders. So the best season is still the best to evaluate running backs on. And again, when we sort by the conference, Jaret Patterson turns up in the top 5 despite being predominantly just a rusher with relatively little receiving game usage, which is highly impressive. It's like Derrick Henry ranking next to Alvin Kamara last year, despite not having that PPR floor. That's what we're kind of talking about with Jaret Patterson in terms of his efficiency as a rusher, even compared to the the MAC East Conference. He was really good in that situation. But go back to his production. At age 18, he joins the team. And there's actually an interesting story where he and his brother were pretty much determined to play on the same team. Now, I don't do the blue-collar history stories because I'm a cold-hearted nerd, I guess. And also, I don't pretend to know these players, so despite knowing the backgrounds, I don't tend to profile using them, so I'm going to leave it out of here. But it is pretty cool that he was so determined to play with his brother, it actually determined where they both ended up, and I like both of them immensely more. It just doesn't really matter about whether they're good or they're bad, or whether I want to draft them, so I mostly leave it out. But I would definitely check it out. He's a very interesting guy, determined, goal-orientated, hardworking, all that stuff that you love about hearing blue-collar workers. I think it's going to fit the Jaret Patterson narrative very well, so go talk to someone who likes to spin narratives and instead of actually look at facts. That was a little shade. I guess I didn't mean it to be. It's just not what I'm going to give you. I'm sorry, it's not. Anyway, he steps onto the team and becomes a dominant running back one as pretty much a pure rusher. Gets over 1,000 yards. I think it's 1,441 yards. In his last season in 2020, the MAC East was actually one of the first conferences to declare that it was not going to play because of COVID and pandemic issues. Jaret Patterson and obviously a number of other people actually petitioned to get the conference open again. Whether you agree that's right or wrong, it's interesting to know how. Again, that pushes towards narrative, but I do think it's interesting about the nature of the player. Whether that's good or bad, I have no idea, and that's why I just kind of stay away. But I do get the strong feeling this guy's an impressive character. Anyway, he pushes onto the field. They only play 6 games, or he only plays 6 games, and he gets just about the same amount of rushing yards he does in those 6 games in 2020 as he did in 13 games in his first year. If that doesn't tell you he improved and was also prolifically productive through those 6 games, I don't know what to tell you. You should probably go check out some tape, because I bet it looks spectacular to watch. 1,000 yards in 6 games? That doesn't even make sense to my tiny little mind. He was incredible throughout his college career as a rusher. And again, where I tend to lean receiving floor, because of the same thing Zachary is pointing to with Derrick Henry being the best possible outcome from a more purely rushing back. And still, you'd rather have Alvin Kamara because we really just want points. It's tough to go for a pure rusher, but Jaret Patterson isn't likely to get much draft capital. He's getting fairly undermentioned through the few ranks and ADPs I've looked at, and I think he makes a very interesting prospect to go take a look at, make up your own opinion, and based on his draft capital and where he's being taken and where he lands in the NFL, if he manages to get any draft capital or any landing spot, I think this dude can rush. I would say other words, but man, this guy's a murderer in the rushing game. I'm pretty sure. But again, probably actually have to watch some tape or talk to some guys who watched him play, because I would never do such a thing, to actually get a good perspective on that. But his stats seem to suggest he was a very good rusher, and that has a role in the NFL, and it does lead to points. And we do see some exceptions, but mostly very high drafted exceptions, I'll point out, of players developing a larger receiving role in the NFL than they ever had in college. So, yeah, there's some far-flung hopes that you could have more of a receiving role than his college profile suggests. But even if not, I mean, he's not going to be a first-round pick. Right now, he might be a second-round pick just because of the value of rushing or running backs in fantasy football, but I strongly suspect that as we see the draft unfold, because of where he's being drafted from, and again, slightly narrative-y that I'm not delving into too much, there's a strong-headed nature to him, which I do not actually think is a negative thing. Because every time he's done it, he's won that way, frankly. But again, go learn more about Jaret Patterson. As all prospects, you should always, these videos aren't a replacement from actually going and finding out more information from other people. You should always take on as much information as possible, is my general philosophy. So definitely find out more about him, and you might learn more about a kind of inkling I get on his character. I think he's an impressive fella. But anyway, that's who he is. He's a incredibly efficient, successful running back who stepped onto a college-level team at age 18 and just dominated that running game. MAC East or not, that's impressive. That was the most notable and impressive thing about Jamal Williams, if you want a direct comparison. He stepped onto the field at age 18, and yes, he always looked like a worse prospect than Aaron Jones, who also did a similar thing and had a decent role in the receiving game and was more efficient. But Jamal Williams stepped onto the field at age 18 at an even lower conference and just balled, man. He scored an incredible amount of touchdowns, took up an incredible amount of the rushing game. That first year, 18 years old, I don't care what conference you're playing in, an 18-year-old bully balling 22, 23-year-olds on defense is highly impressive. And we saw some of that upside with Jamal Williams in the NFL. And I think Jaret Patterson has a similar upside. And I know that doesn't sound overly attractive, but I mean, Jamal Williams traded for significant value at a certain point. And if you're interested in who this player is, he's very good. I do think he's a very good player. Just has limited fantasy upside with low expectation of draft capital, and that brings about its own different problems for our thing. But as a player, I think he's going to be very useful. I think he's going to be good relative to his draft cost for sure in the NFL. But anyway, I talked for 25 minutes without even throwing up a graph, so I best go. I think very highly of Jaret Patterson. I think he's someone worth keeping an eye on, and someone you should definitely learn more about. Apologize for the hat and the hat show that I put on without really expecting to. Sorry about that. I don't mean to stuff these videos with crap. but I'm in a mood. I guess. I'm gonna go be in a mood elsewhere or off screen, I guess. Appreciate you checking out. If you did, let me know what you think of Jaret Patterson or any other aspects to him that I might not have covered, because again, I try not to delve in to players' personal stories, but I'm really interested in this guy. He seems interesting. But anyway, let me know, and yeah, thanks for checking it out. I'll see you again in the next one. Probably more running backs, honestly. I'm a little tired of wide receiver right now. I need a break. So I'm running through the running backs I have not yet ranked, and Jaret Patterson was top of the list because a Patreon pointed out I've got like 8 running backs that I just have to be ranked written next to it. I don't actually have a rank for them. Oh, where do I have him ranked? That's a good question. I have him in my 3rd tier, which is a pretty high tier because I find I find lack of depth in this running back class, but I have him right next to Michael Carter. I have him slightly below Michael Carter. I haven't done a video on Michael Carter yet, but I like Michael Carter's more well-rounded skill set, and he also is very efficient, but on a more limited role than Jaret Patterson ever had. He never hit the heights of opportunity share, for example, because he was sharing the backfield with someone else, who I also have to do a video on, to be fair, so I won't go into it in too deep. But Michael Carter has that more significant receiving floor, and so if he develops a partial role in the NFL, then you have that receiving floor. He's very useful in PPR, scoring in PPR leagues, even without necessarily dominating a backfield. Jaret Patterson would have to dominate a backfield to be more significant than that. And mostly, again, I'm comparing, his likely outcome is kind of a Jamal Williams. He's going to show up if he gets any kind of opportunity, because I think he's very, very good at what he does. And yeah, I think an NFL team can do it, but again, I just lean that receiving upside. But that's where I have him. I have him and Michael Carter at running back 6 and 7 in my overall pre-draft ranks, which are obviously all going to go topsy-turvy by the time we draft capital. But that's where he is for me right now. So yeah, thanks, and again, apologies about the hat. Appreciate it. Talk to you again next time. I gotta do the outro thing. I hope you're happy, healthy, and safe, and keep grinding, guys. Seriously, really appreciate it. Thanks very much. Talk to you again next time. Bye.
Do you have the time to